Hey guys, tonight we're starting high above the clouds, so high in fact that you can hear the air thin around the peaks of Mount Olympus. No lightning yet, just the heavy stillness that comes before a storm. The marble columns gleam like polished bones, and the clouds curl at the god's feet like lazy cats. From this height, the world below seems small, manageable, like something you could hold in your hand and promise never to break. But you know better by now. The gods of Olympus loved many things, wine, beauty, swans, but keeping their promises. Not so much. They swore oaths like mortals breathed, easily, frequently, with very little intention of following through. And those oaths, they didn't just break hearts. They rewrote weather, warped forests, invented monsters, made mothers weep and heroes curse the sky. You probably won't survive this if you came expecting justice or divine accountability. But you will drift through something older and quieter, the echo of forgotten vows. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far these sleepy myths travel. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step through the outer gate of Olympus. No one stops you. The gods aren't watching tonight. They've wandered off distracted by festivals and vanity and the next storm they plan to throw for fun. But the stones here still remember. The halls whisper. The thrones creak under the weight of oaths, once made and quickly forgotten. You walk through the courtyard of smoke, where offerings were burned and promises forged. That's where we start, at the beginning of a very specific kind of lie. You see Zeus first. Of course you do. He's hard to miss, larger than life muscles, like sculpted arrogance eyes, like lightning threatening to strike just for the drama of it. He's laughing in the fresco, hand raised, mid-oath, a golden goblet in the other. You get the sense he's already forgotten what he just said. And that's the problem. Zeus swore by the river Styx, an unbreakable oath, even for a god. If you did that and broke your word, the punishment was exile, silence, loss of power for years. It was serious. So naturally, Zeus swore on it whenever he wanted to shut someone up. You step into one of the lesser-known halls. No throne here. Just a marble table and a cracked bowl where pomegranate juice once passed as wine. And you remember the first of his many exceptions. A vow to protect Io, a mortal priestess, lovely and loyal. He loved her, or said he did, which in Olympus terms often meant run. When Hera caught wind of the affair, Zeus swore he would keep Io safe. He transformed her into a cow, which if you're paying attention is not how love works. Then, in an effort to prove his honesty to Hera, he handed the cow, Io, over. Because nothing says, I'm a faithful husband, like surrendering your terrified girlfriend in bovine form. You press your hand against the table. It's still warm. And Io, she was watched by Argus, the 100-eyed guardian, forced to roam, swarmed by biting flies, mute and alone. All because Zeus couldn't keep a promise past the first thunderclap. You pass a long corridor of scrolls next, some burned, some blank. These are the vows made to mortals. You pause by one etched in faded gold leaf. I will return. I will not abandon you. No signature. You know who wrote it. And you also know they didn't come back. You reach a balcony that overlooks the mortal realm. Far below, fields stretch in quiet anticipation. Crops grow. Cities light fires. Sailors pray for calm seas. And somewhere, someone is offering a sacrifice, not because they trust the gods will answer, but because they hope they might. Even now. You sit at the edge of the balcony, feet dangling over stories already written. You wonder, did the gods forget their promises? Or did they just never mean to keep them? You glance up. The stars are sharp tonight, watching, unblinking, like Argus maybe. You lie back marble against your spine and let the night take you. Because the gods are sleeping, and their promises, they sleep even deeper. You're still lying on that cold marble balcony. It doesn't creak, doesn't crumble. It just exists, unchanged like the gods themselves, like the stone faces carved above temple doors, the kind of permanence that looks like strength from a distance. But up close you're starting to see it for what it is, silence, heavy, deliberate, and always selective. Above you, the stars begin to shift. You're not sure if it's real or just the stories realigning. One of the constellations blinks. No, not blinks. Winks. You sit up. Welcome to Olympus, where broken promises are made with a flourish and a golden smile. You walk back into the halls through archways dripping with vines and forgotten titles. Gold flakes from the ceiling like old lies peeling under scrutiny. And here, in this long corridor of hushed betrayal, you find another story. A girl, a cow, 1,000 eyes that never slept. Io. We began her tale before. Now we open it fully. You find her in a painting on the wall, mid-sprint, across a green plain. Hooves, pounding flies, swarming her eyes, wide with a grief too old for her face. You know that expression. It's the look of someone who heard a promise and believed it. Zeus swore protection, swore she would be hidden, loved, safe. Instead, he turned her into a creature and handed her over to his wife, Hera, as a gift. This wasn't mercy. This wasn't shelter. This was passing the blame down the line like a flaming torch handed to a child. Argus was assigned to watch her Argus Panoptes, the all-seeing, the sleepless, a creature of too many eyes and not enough dreams. You picture him now, a body covered in blinking orbs, each one watching a different lie unfold. He was chosen not for trust, but for efficiency. If Zeus's promise was to keep an eye on Io, then Hera took it literally. So Io wandered through forests, rivers, deserts, always seen, never saved. Historians still argue whether Zeus meant to protect her or simply delay Hera's fury until he found a better excuse. That's the thing about divine oaths. They're loud when spoken, but paper thin in the follow-through. You pause beside a brazier, long gone cold. Etched into the iron lip are the words, "No promise holds once offered to the wind." That wind, of course, being Hera. She appears in the next alcove, sculpted in jade. Regal, severe, a woman carved from loyalty and vengeance in equal measure. She was queen, yes, but not always fair. Hera's promise, too, was once golden. She had vowed to rule beside Zeus, to uphold sacred law, to protect the sanctity of marriage. The irony of that last one stretches across the centuries like a thundercloud that never stops rumbling. You walk through a garden filled with statues that never blink, mortals turned into symbols, into caution, into silence. They all once heard promises, promises of reward or freedom or forgiveness. Io eventually reached Egypt. Some say she was restored to human form there and bore Zeus a child. Others say she remained a cow, worshipped as Isis. The story's fragment split like glass under pressure. And Zeus, he forgot. He moved on. He always does. But Io didn't. The body may transform. The name may shift. But memory, that survives. You touch the vine-covered pillar and see a flash, her running across an unfamiliar landscape, her breath hitching her hooves bloody, not because of love, because of escape, because of abandonment. Because when gods lie, they don't call it betrayal, they call it myth. You keep walking. The hallway ends at a pool, black, still, reflective. Not water, not quite. Memory, maybe. You kneel beside it and look down, not at yourself, but at another promise, left to rot in divine mouths. Semele. Another girl, another love, another vow wrapped in thunder. Zeus had sworn to her, "I will come to you as I truly am." She believed him. And when he did, lightning radiance, all glory and fire, it killed her, burned her alive in her own home. Because that's the fine print on promises from gods. If you ask them to be honest, they might be. Just once, and it'll destroy you. You sit back from the pool. It doesn't ripple. You wonder how many others swam here, looking for truth, for comfort, for the face of someone who meant what they said. You don't cry. You just feel tired. And maybe that's the real curse. Not the transformation, not the punishment. The exhaustion of trying to hold a god to their word. You move on. Further down the path, now past the shrines no one tends anymore. You pause in front of a low door, carved into its wood, the forgotten room. Inside the walls are lined with oaths, not scrolls, not letters, just sentences etched directly into stone. I will protect you. I swear this on the river Styx. You have my word. You are mine, and I will never let harm find you. You are not alone. Some of the phrases are scratched out. Some are still fresh. You know without being told. None of them were kept. You turn slowly, facing the door again. It doesn't close behind you. It just waits. As if it too knows what it means to be promised things, to be used and then forgotten, to hold the weight of what was said and carry it like a spine. You exit the room. Outside, the night has softened again, not because the gods have learned, but because the story is shifting away from them for now. You walk through a garden where broken oaths bloom like flowers, and you realize the gods never suffered the consequences of forgetting. But they also never got what they promised. They lost it before they even finished speaking. Because a vow not honored isn't power. It's a curse with a good haircut. And somewhere beneath the sky that never sleeps, the mortals still wait, still listening, still remembering. The garden ends, not suddenly, just in the way that quiet ends when someone finally admits what was never said aloud. You walk beneath an arbor of dead vines, their tendrils stiff like wire. Once they might have held grapes or hope. Now they just cling to each other like regrets. Ahead, a stone path curves gently downward like a sigh turned into a road. You follow it. There's something cooler here, a shift in the air. The scent changes laurel pine, a trace of river mud. The kind of place where memories grow slower, deeper, less theatrical, more deliberate. You find him beside a tree. Apollo, god of light music, prophecy, plagues, and charm so thick it should come with a warning label. His statue sits beneath the laurel, golden and smug. Not a strand of hair out of place, lyre on his hip, eyes cast skyward like he's mid-performance for an audience too dazzled to question him. But you're not here to watch. You're here for the girl who ran. Daphne. She doesn't get a temple, just the tree. You sit beneath it. It leans toward you, quiet, curved, graceful. If you didn't know better, you'd think it was ordinary. But myths leave marks, even on bark. The story's simple if you only hear it once. Apollo fell in love, chased. Daphne fled, prayed, and was turned into a tree before he could catch her. But the more you listen, the more you feel that this wasn't love. This was pursuit. This was a promise made by a god to himself, never to her. He swore aloud, I will love her forever. He swore, she will be mine. He swore no one will take her from me. He swore it to the wind, and the wind, of course, carried it straight to her. She ran, fast, through forests, over rivers, breath-tearing, heart-hammering, because she knew when gods fall in love, women fall into tombs. So she prayed, not to Apollo, to her father, a river god, minor but compassionate in that fleeting way some parents are when pressed between myth and mortality. He answered, and Daphne's legs rooted, her arms stretched skyward. Her hair became leaves, her heartbeat slowed, and the chase ended, not with a scream, but with stillness. Historians still argue whether Daphne's transformation was mercy or erasure. Some say she was saved. Others say she was silenced in slow motion. And you sitting beneath her now feel both. Apollo reached her just as the bark hardened. And what did he do? Did he weep? Did he beg forgiveness? No. He declared her his, still, claimed the tree as sacred, made her leaves into his crown, turned the girl who said no into the symbol of his glory. You reach up and touch one of the leaves. It doesn't crumble. It's not dead. It's watching. You walk around the tree slowly. On one side, Apollo's name is carved in the roots. On the other, she did not want to be remembered this way. The irony, Apollo is the god of truth. And yet he's been lying ever since that day, calling it love, calling it fate, wearing her crown as though she gave it to him, not became it. You think of all the people told that being wanted is a gift, even when it hurts. That passion excuses pressure. That beauty invites pursuit. That saying no just means chase harder. Daphne's story is the mythic version of a door slammed shut and never reopened. And the gods, they framed it, hung it up in golden halls as proof of romance. You look back at the statue of Apollo. His lyre glints in the half-light. The same hand that strums music wrote sonnets about a girl who begged for distance. He never touched her, but he still claimed her. You walk away from the laurel tree, careful not to crush the fallen leaves. Each one feels like a name someone tried to forget. Further down the path you find other trees, not just laurel, cypress, oak, ash. Each one once a girl with no exit left but transformation. Each one once promised safety by a father, by a lover, by the gods themselves. And when those promises snapped, so did they. But they didn't disappear. They grew. You stop at the edge of a quiet glade. The sun filters through in long, slow fingers, and you imagine Apollo walking here centuries ago, brushing bark like skin, pretending it loved him back. You whisper softly, "She ran," and then you walk on. The glade remains behind you, golden, green, silent, but not passive. And somewhere in the shifting leaves, a breeze curls around your ear so soft you almost miss it. We remember. The path away from Daphne's grove winds downward, tracing the edge of a ravine filled with whispering water and moss so thick it silences your steps. You walk slowly now, not because you're tired, but because the weight of that unkept oath still clings to your skin. I will love her forever, he said. And then he made her a crown. You step onto a small stone bridge. Below, a stream rushes quietly, carrying pieces of old stories. Downstream, echoes of laurel leaves, tangled hair, soft prayers for escape. The water here doesn't roar, it remembers. And just across the bridge, a new figure rises from the mist. Demeter. You've likely heard of her as the goddess of the harvest. Golden fields, warm bread, mother's love wrapped in wheat and sunlight. But she wasn't always warmth. She learned to burn cold because she made a promise too. I will keep her safe. And then her daughter vanished. You step into a field that shouldn't exist here, thick with barley gold, with ripeness yet untouched. No footprints, no sickles, just quiet abundance. At its center stands a statue not of Demeter, but of Persephone. Mid-reach, mid-step, frozen just before she takes a bite. We know how this story ends, but tonight we trace it back to the beginning, not the kidnapping, not the deal, the vow. Demeter loved her daughter more than the sun loved the morning, more than gods usually love anything they didn't create for sport. Persephone was her light, her joy, her reason. And so Demeter promised, no harm will ever come to you while I still breathe. It was the kind of promise that only works in poems, because down in the shadows, Hades watched, and Hades, god of the underworld, king of silence, collector of names, was not one to ask permission. He stole Persephone in a chariot of obsidian, and fire splitting the earth like it owed him a favor. No warning, no choice, just absence. One moment, Demeter was holding her daughter's hand. The next, nothing but sky and the smell of upturned soil. She searched, she scorched. Demeter's grief was not passive. It didn't look like sobbing in corners or fading away. It looked like wrath. The earth wilted. The rivers stopped. Trees refused to bloom. Entire cities withered under her silence. This wasn't just heartbreak. This was broken contract. Because when gods promise something, it's not poetry. It's binding. And she had sworn to protect Persephone. Now the world would starve with her. You kneel beside the Persephone statue. At her feet lies a single fruit, a pomegranate, split, bleeding. And here's the cruelest part. When Demeter finally found her daughter, after threats, after pleas, after silence, louder than war, Persephone wasn't fully hers anymore. She had eaten 6 seeds, just enough to matter, just enough to bind her to the underworld. A loophole, an asterisk, a fine print clause that no one warned her about. So they struck a deal. Half a year above, half below. 6 months of warmth, 6 of winter. Historians still argue whether Persephone ate the seeds willingly or was tricked. Some say she loved Hades. Others say she missed her mother every minute she was gone. What they agree on is that Demeter's promise to protect her always was never whole again. You walk further into the field, and the seasons shift as you move. Summer, autumn, winter, spring, over and over, like Persephone's footsteps echoing across the same path each year, never free to choose a new direction. Demeter tried. She stopped time, threatened Olympus, withheld harvests until even the gods grew hungry. But the deal had been made. The seeds had been swallowed, and a mother's promise so simple, so pure, was rewritten into calendar pages. You pause by a grove of olive trees, their leaves twitching slightly in the breeze. This is where the mortals waited, where they watched their crops die, their families suffer, and whispered, "Why do we even pray if the gods break their own vows?" You sit in the soil. You think of all the mothers, since divine and mortal, who promised to keep their daughters safe and had to live with the moment that promise cracked, not because they failed, but because the world shifted beneath their feet and never warned them. You close your eyes. Somewhere beneath the soil, you feel Persephone turning once more, heading back to her throne of bones and flowers. Not a victim now, a queen, but still bound, still remembered. You whisper to the pomegranate. She didn't ask to be a season. The fruit doesn't answer, but a petal falls. One, soft, like the kind of forgiveness no one says out loud. You stand again. Demeter doesn't appear. She doesn't need to. She's in the soil now, in the way things grow slower, more carefully, with caution, because her promise wasn't just broken, it was witnessed, and the earth never forgot. You leave the field behind. The air shifts again, darker now, but not unpleasant, like twilight folding itself over your shoulders. The light has gone soft, and the sound of your footsteps barely registers, like you've stepped into a place that doesn't want to be disturbed. This path is older, more twisted. The ground here feels reluctant, like it remembers too much. And you do too, because this next story doesn't come with marble temples or harvest feasts. It comes with feathers, a labyrinth, and a name spoken in half-ashamed whispers by gods who pretend they've forgotten her. Medusa. You walk into a wide stone chamber. Columns lean slightly like they're listening. At its center, a mosaic, cracked, faded, but still clear, a woman, wild hair, arms outstretched, eyes wide not with rage, but with terror. And in the corners of the mosaic, hiding in the shadows, snakes. So many snakes. But not at first. No, Medusa wasn't always the monster. She was once a priestess. Beautiful, yes. But more than that, devoted. She served Athena, wore the robes, kept her vows, lived within temple walls that echoed with prayer. And then Poseidon walked in, god of the sea, of waves that crash and don't apologize. He made no promises, just took. Here's where the story begins to sting. because Medusa prayed to the wrong goddess, not for protection, but in loyalty. She clung to her role, her faith. But gods are fickle with attachments. They prefer admiration from a distance, never messy, never complicated, never human. What happened in the temple that day still fuels debate. Was it desire? Violence? Some texts soften it. Others don't bother. But what they all agree on is this: she didn't want it, and she prayed. But Athena didn't answer with comfort. She answered with transformation. Hair became serpents. Her gaze became stone. Her body was turned into a threat, because it was easier to punish the broken than admit that something sacred had been shattered within the temple walls. Athena's oath: this is my sanctuary. All who serve it are under my protection. You trace those words on the base of the statue and feel how hollow they've become. Medusa wasn't just cast out, she was rebranded. No longer a woman, a monster, but not the kind with fangs or claws, the kind born from divine shame and redirected anger. You step into a small antechamber just beyond the mosaic. It's quiet, dusty, no worshipers, no candles, only statues, rows of them, warriors, wanderers, even the occasional god frozen mid-motion expressions caught somewhere between awe and regret. Because they looked, because they hunted her, because they were warned. But you can't help but wonder, did they think she wanted to be feared, or was that simply easier? You kneel beside a smaller figure. It's a girl, maybe 15. Her hands are raised like she's trying to shield her eyes. You read the plaque. Failed to kill her. Forgot to ask why she fought. This was no villain's lair. It was a graveyard of assumptions. And then there's Perseus, our golden boy, tasked with slaying Medusa, armed with shiny gifts from the gods, a mirrored shield so he wouldn't have to look her in the eye. He didn't come to talk. He didn't come to listen. He came to behead a symbol and claim victory. Historians still argue whether Perseus's mission was heroism or cleanup. Some say he was a pawn. Others say he saw the truth and looked away. But one thing is certain. He killed her and used her head as a weapon for years after, carried it in a bag like a trophy, pointed it at enemies, told stories of how clever he was. He said she couldn't hurt anymore, but she did, even in death. Because people remembered the monster, not the woman. They praised the silence, not the scream. You return to the main chamber. The light is fading. You look up, and on the ceiling someone has painted her face, not snarling, not cruel, just tired, eyes closed. No snakes, just hair, windswept, normal, forgotten. You reach out and touch the edge of the mosaic again. It's cool, not cold. She's not waiting for revenge. She's just waiting for someone to tell the truth. That the promise of sanctuary is only sacred if it holds. That loyalty is not a shield if the gods only honor it when convenient. that being beautiful is not an invitation, and being angry is not a curse. You rise slowly. The chamber doesn't echo, it absorbs, takes the story back into its stones. Another unkept oath, sealed in silence. But you carry it now, and it will not be forgotten. The hallway out of Medusa's chamber feels colder, somehow. Not the kind of cold that bites, more like the quiet left behind when judgment echoes too long and everyone pretends not to hear it. Your footsteps click softly against the stone, and as you round the next curve, the walls shift again. Now they shimmer, softer lighting, gilded trim, the scent of myrrh and distant roses. You've entered the part of the story where things look gentler, more elegant, but the betrayals hum beneath the silk. Welcome to Hephaestus's home. Well, one of them. The forge god, the craftsman, the builder of thrones and traps. He made the chains that bound Prometheus, the net that caught Ares, the golden automatons that walked like humans. He created wonders, and in return, he was promised something, a marriage, to the most beautiful goddess in Olympus, Aphrodite. It was supposed to be peace, a gift from Zeus for Hephaestus's skill, loyalty, and tireless work. You deserve this, Zeus said, and Hephaestus, lonely, limping, soot-stained, believed him. He believed that Aphrodite's hand meant a heart, that the gods wouldn't joke with a promise, that beauty this time wouldn't be cruel. He was wrong. Aphrodite never wanted the forge god. She wanted fire, yes, but not the kind that came from coal and steel. She wanted Ares, war, heat, bodies that didn't creak when they moved, smiles that didn't flinch when others looked too long. So, while Hephaestus shaped crowns and carved worlds into metal, Aphrodite met Ares in dark corners, on cloud banks, in chambers with no locks. She made no oaths of love to Hephaestus, but she did say yes, and for a god that's supposed to mean something. You stand before a bronze door, warm to the touch. It swings open without sound. Inside a workshop, or maybe a heart. Golden light spills across anvil's gears, small machines still ticking softly, like dreams half forgotten. On the walls, sketches of inventions never built. In the center, a statue of Hephaestus, not as a god, but as a man, slightly hunched, eyes focused, hands outstretched, not reaching for power, just for understanding. At his feet lies the net, not metaphorical, the very one, spun of invisible thread so fine it couldn't be seen until it wrapped around two bodies tangled in a bed that wasn't theirs. Hephaestus caught them, Aphrodite, Ares, and every god on Olympus came to laugh, because betrayal is spectacle, and the pain of someone who believed well, that's just good theater. Historians still argue whether Hephaestus set the trap out of vengeance or proof. Some say he wanted to humiliate them. Others say he just needed someone to admit it had happened. Because Aphrodite never did. Not really. She never apologized, never explained. Just brushed stardust off her shoulders and left the forge for the sea, for her temples, for her next thrill, but the promise that stayed broken. You run your fingers across the net. It shimmers even now, delicate, weightless. It catches guilt more than flesh. And you wonder, what does a god do when even divine contracts become punchlines? Hephaestus didn't rage. He built. He carved his loneliness into statues that didn't speak. He forged rings that never rusted, even when promises did. He shaped golden limbs for mortals who'd lost theirs. In wars he never started. Because maybe if he couldn't be loved, he could be useful. The room grows darker as you step back. Behind you on the wall is a small plaque, barely noticeable. It reads, "Crafted with faith, shattered by silence." You think of how often that happens, not because someone lied, but because someone else said nothing. Aphrodite said nothing. Zeus, who orchestrated the marriage, said less. And Olympus just chuckled and moved on. You walk to the far wall where a new sculpture waits. This one's unfinished. Half of a woman's face, carved from marble, rests beside a heart-shaped mold of bronze, one of Hephaestus's final works, maybe. You can't tell if it was meant to be her or someone else. You reach out, but you don't touch. Some wounds aren't meant to be traced. You leave the workshop, back into the corridor that feels heavier now, not because of heat, but because of all the quiet promises, ones that weren't even spoken aloud, just implied through kindness. Hope. The way someone looks at you, like maybe this time will be different. And then it's not. You pass a small fountain just outside the chamber. The water doesn't sparkle. It drips, steady, hollow. A single inscription lines its edge. Love promised like a gift should not become a sentence. You don't need to know who wrote it. You already understand. The path forward seems narrower now, carved into the stone like an afterthought, like someone remembered too late that this part of the story still needed telling. You trace your fingers along the wall. It's cool, moist, with old air, and the kind of stillness that feels borrowed. As you walk, something shifts. The scent changes. The sweetness of rose oil and bronze gives way to freshly tilled earth and damp roots. A single tree grows in the center of the next chamber. Gnarled, ancient, half dead, half alive. You know where you are. You're standing in Demeter's garden again, but deeper this time. Deeper than when you walked with her sorrow and saw her daughter frozen in mid-step. Now you're walking in the echo of a bargain. The one made after all the promises were already broken. Because when Persephone disappeared into the underworld and Demeter turned her grief into famine, the world began to fold. Nothing grew. Nothing moved. And even the gods who usually watched mortals suffer with popcorn in hand started to get nervous. Zeus, who had promised Demeter peace, who had sworn on Olympus that Persephone would always be safe, suddenly realized he'd underestimated maternal rage. The earth was dying. And Zeus hated paperwork, so he did what gods always do. When consequences show up, he sent someone else to fix it. Hermes, the messenger god, fleet-footed, charming, practically allergic to conflict. He zipped down to the underworld on divine errands, words tucked under his tongue like sugar cubes, diplomatic, sweet, non-committal. He found Persephone seated beside Hades, not chained, not crying, just quiet, eating nothing, until she did. 6 seeds, red, juicy, familiar. It wasn't hunger, it was choice, or defiance, or maybe the kind of accident that happens when you're lonely and forget the rules. Historians still argue whether she knew what the seeds meant. Some believe Hades tricked her. Others claim she accepted her role. There are even fringe theories suggesting she wanted the duality, wanted both sunlight and shadow. But the result was the same. Once you eat in the underworld, you belong to it. And Zeus, seeing no other way out, struck a bargain. Persephone will spend half the year above, half below. It wasn't poetic. It was practical. A seasonal contract. And with that, Demeter, her rage finally answered, if not truly soothed, let the earth bloom again. But here's the detail. Most stories skip. Demeter wasn't there when the deal was struck. She didn't agree. She was informed. Because the gods had decided that her grief had become inconvenient. She had made a promise, but they had made a schedule. And so Persephone became 2 people. Spring's daughter, winter's queen. You walk beneath the gnarled tree, and the air shifts again. Half blossoms, half rot, just like her. A woman made of opposites, half in bloom, half in shadow. And above your head, a branch creaks, then drops something small into your palm. A pomegranate seed, still wet, still red, still dangerous. You stare at it. This little thing rewrote the seasons, split a mother's heart, tied a girl to a throne of bones and silence. And no one apologized. Not Zeus, who offered the deal like a weather report. Not Hermes, who smiled through the lie. Not Hades, who handed her the fruit. Even Persephone said nothing. Because there was no room for words in that moment, only consequences. You tucked the seed into your pocket, not out of reverence, but to remind yourself not all bargains are honest. Some are just palatable. You keep walking. A hallway opens to your right, lined with small statues, each one depicting Persephone at a different time of year. In spring she runs. In summer she laughs. In autumn she stares into the distance. And in winter she sits on a throne, eyes, heavy lips, pressed into a line so straight it could cut marble. You stand before that one longest, and for a second you wonder if she could rewrite the promise, would she? Would she trade half freedom for total safety? Or did she come to love her duality? No one knows. No one asks her. The gods moved on. The seasons turn. And somewhere up above, Demeter still weeps into the soil when the cold returns. Her promise. It lingers in every dying leaf, every frost-touched stalk of wheat, every mother who watches a door close and doesn't know when it will open again. You turn back to the tree. It's dropped a second seed, but this time you leave it. Let it rot. Let it tell its story in silence. You walk away, and the garden breathes. The soil fades under your feet as stone returns smoother now, almost polished. You're deeper into the temple now, where the gods keep their more technical lies, the ones hidden in the fine print. You follow the sound of sandals, not yours, his. Hermes moves ahead of you, half visible, half not. The god of roads, of crossroads, of smooth-talking travelers and sealed letters. He darts through cracks in the air like logic, trying to make a graceful exit from a bad deal. He's holding a scroll, looks official, ribboned and wax-stamped like it might be a decree or an apology. But when he opens it, there's nothing on it, just blank parchment and the faint scent of old olives. Typical. You're walking into the moment where words stopped meaning what they were supposed to mean. The pomegranate bargain had been struck. Demeter had resumed the harvest. Persephone was queen of duality. But now came the delivery. The gods needed someone to escort her back and forth twice a year like a mythological Uber. Enter Hermes. He was meant to make it feel civilized. He flew down in his winged sandals, smiling like a diplomat, and not at all like someone who'd just been sent to fix yet another divine PR disaster. The first time he arrived at Hades' gates, the underworld didn't even blink. Cerberus yawned. The shades kept wailing. Hades, he didn't stand up. He just pointed toward the throne. Persephone sat there, still, holding nothing, her crown of asphodel slightly askew. Hermes cleared his throat, offered the scroll. She didn't read it, just nodded. And that was it. The first return. A solemn walk to the edge of the world, through fields of bones and slow regrets. Hermes tried to talk. Small talk, really. How have you been? You look regal. But she didn't answer. Just looked straight ahead. Focused. Like someone watching her own heartbeat. You follow that same path now. And along the walls, bas-reliefs depict her steps, not with joy or reluctance, but precision. A kind of trained rhythm, like someone fulfilling the terms of a contract she didn't negotiate. Historians still argue whether Persephone ever had agency in her returns. Some suggest she grew to love Hades. Others claim she planned her eventual rebellion. A few even say she became something more down there. Something divine, not despite the darkness, but because of it. But in this version, she walks. Hermes walks. And spring holds its breath until she steps through. You pause. There's a mural here. You nearly miss it, because it doesn't scream for attention, just whispers. It shows Persephone walking beside Hermes, but from above. A bird's eye view. The ground beneath her left foot is green. Beneath her right, it's gray. Life, death, step by step. No one holds her hand, because this isn't a story of rescue. It's a commute. And Hermes, he never quite looks at her. His gaze always just off to the side, as if he knows that if he ever made eye contact, he might have to apologize. And gods don't do that. Not really. They offer riddles, gifts, compromises, but not remorse. You keep walking. Eventually, the tunnel opens to a smaller chamber. There's a fountain in the center, shaped like a chalice, wide and shallow. The water inside moves in two directions at once, clockwise, counterclockwise. You lean in and see reflections that don't belong to you. A girl in a garden, a queen on a throne, a god with winged feet trying to explain something that can't be explained. Above the fountain, chiseled in tiny nervous letters, escorted doesn't mean freed. You sit beside it for a moment and think about how often deliverers become bystanders, how often promises are delivered without being honored. Hermes didn't lie, but he didn't intervene either. He did his job, courier of the gods, bridge between worlds, bearer of blank scrolls that never say quite enough. You look around. On the far wall, a second scroll is pinned in stone, unrolled, sealed again. The title reads, Seasonal Transfer Agreement, Article 6, but it's scratched out. In its place, a daughter is not a receipt. You nod, then stand, because Hermes is already gone, off to the next errand, the next half-truth, the next broken promise wrapped in wings and sealed with style. You step back into the corridor, and the air changes. You can smell summer again. Wheat, cut grass, something rising from the soil. She's back. But for how long? The scrolls don't say. They never do. The path curves gently now, a slow loop rather than a descent. You're not climbing, not falling, just circling, like a memory you can't put down. The floor feels warmer. The light glows amber, and the air smells of smoke, but not danger, just burnt offerings. Sacrifices still sizzling in some forgotten altar above. You're in the domain of promises that were made not in thunder or blood or ink, but in ash and breath. Because once, a long time ago, the gods used to answer, not always kindly, not always fairly, but at least they noticed. Now you're surrounded by the ghosts of those unanswered prayers and walking right into the myth of Hephaestus again. But this time, not in his own home. This is a different memory, one made of metal and silence. See, after the net incident, Aphrodite Ares, public humiliation. Hephaestus didn't rage, not visibly. He returned to work, to his forge, to his fire, and built something new, a chair. It looked ordinary, even humble. But when Hera, queen of the gods, and let's be honest, not his biggest fan, sat in it, she couldn't get up. Ever. Her legs stuck, her arms locked to the sides. The chair held her like resentment and wouldn't let go, because Hephaestus had made a promise too, that he wouldn't be used, not again, not like a pawn in other people's alliances and mock weddings. Historians still argue whether the chair was vengeance or genius, whether it was a tantrum in steel or a blueprint for boundaries. Some fringe scholars even suggest it was a lesson, a divine TED talk on the importance of consent. Regardless, the gods panicked. Hera was their queen, and gods don't do well with being held still. Zeus, of course, promised anything if Hephaestus would let her go. Name your price. And Hephaestus did. Give me Aphrodite. And so the deal was struck. Again. A second promise made to fix the first one that shattered. You trace the mural in this chamber. It's a ring of gods, their mouths open mid-plea, while Hera sits stone-faced in a chair that hugs her like a bad memory. At the center of the ring, Hephaestus, alone, not triumphant, just waiting to see if this time the promise will hold. It didn't. Of course not. You already know that. But back then, he didn't. He hoped. That's what's cruelest, not the lie. The pause before it. The moment where belief blooms right before it burns. As you walk deeper into the chamber, you spot a collection of burnt scrolls on a low altar, each one half charred, illegible. Sacrifices once meant for the gods. You pick one up. It crumbles. There's no record of what was promised in return, just smoke. And above the altar, carved in looping script, fire accepts all things. But it doesn't keep them. A few steps away, there's a smaller pedestal. This one holds only a single offering, a delicate wreath made of bronze laurel leaves. Not Apollo's this time. These are rougher, warped slightly at the edges. They weren't made to crown a victor. They were made to last. An eternal apology in metal, maybe from Hephaestus, maybe to himself. You sit beside the pedestal. The laurel doesn't shine, and it just rests, like it's waiting for someone who meant their words. Someone who knew that apologies don't end in if. The room starts to cool again, not with anger, with exhaustion, like a god who has tried to hold on to belief only to find it rusting in their hands. You leave the chamber, but something follows. A sound, low, regular, the rhythm of hammering, far off, but steady. Hephaestus is still working somewhere, not for glory, not for love, but because creation is the one thing he can trust. You walk toward the echo and wonder, when the gods stopped answering, who did they think was still listening? The hammering fades, but the rhythm stays. You feel it in your own steps, now that low metronomic pulse of someone who's been walking for far too long with a weight that never shifts. You turn another corner, and the air thickens again. This time it's not heat, or grief. It's expectation, the kind that hangs in the throat of a courtroom or right before a first confession. You've reached a hall of promises that were never broken because they were never finished. Unspoken oaths, half-made vows, and one very famous hesitation, the kind that rewrote a generation of women. You're stepping into the shadow of Orestes, but not yet. First you meet his sister, Electra. You see her before you see the room. She stands in silhouette at the far end, tall, proud, and clenched, like a statue that refuses to crack. Her hands are fists, her eyes fire, because justice in her mind is overdue, and she's right, but also wrong, because justice in Greek myth doesn't arrive. It ricochets. Let's rewind. Agamemnon, yes, the man who sacrificed his daughter Iphigenia to get a favorable win to Troy, returns from war. He's tired, victorious, and possibly still cursed by all the screaming ghosts he left behind at Aulis. His wife, Clytemnestra, greets him with a bath and a knife. She kills him, not for power, not for gold, but for their daughter. Historians still argue whether Clytemnestra's act was justice or murder. Some call her a feminist icon, others a villain. The myths rarely agree. Plays argue over her tone. Scholars pick apart her footwear. But one thing's clear. She promised herself she'd never forgive him, and she didn't. Now the problem is, Electra saw it all, and Electra made a different promise, one to her father, and to revenge, not to justice, to reversal. Years pass. Electra hides her brother Orestes away from their murderous mother and her new lover, Aegisthus. She waits. She whispers plans into the walls. When he returns, the decision has already been made. But here's where the silence creeps in. Orestes hesitates. He stands above Clytemnestra, his own mother, and waits. She speaks, not as a queen, as a mother. She reminds him of lullabies, of fevered nights and cups of water brought in shaking hands, of the weight of being held before you knew how to stand. She doesn't deny the murder, but she asks him to look at her as her child. And for one trembling second, he does, and doesn't move. But Electra, always. Electra steps forward and says she made a promise to kill. You made one to avenge. So he strikes. Blood sprays across stone that has already forgotten which side it's on. Clytemnestra dies. Orestes lives. But only technically. Because now come the Furies, the ancient spirits of vengeance, not bound by mortal logic or Olympic bureaucracy. They come for him, not because he killed his mother, but because he broke the natural order. The chain of oaths snapped, and what remains? Madness. You walk slowly through the chamber. On the left wall, you see the scene Clytemnestra reaching out. Orestes' sword raised but shaking. Electra, just behind, whispering into the back of his neck. On the right wall, the aftermath. Furies crawling across the ceiling, eyes black, wings shredded, nails dragging across marble as they chase a man who thought revenge would feel like closure. It doesn't. You approach a plinth in the center. On it lies a scroll. This one isn't blank. It's a list, a genealogy, not of bloodlines, but of broken pacts. Agamemnon to Iphigenia, Clytemnestra to Agamemnon, Electra to justice, Orestes to himself. Each line ends not in period or flourish, but in a smudge, as if someone almost signed their name and didn't. You reach for the scroll, and a whisper rises from the walls. They all made promises. None of them asked what would come next. There's one final mural tucked in the corner. You nearly miss it. It's small, faint. It shows a child not named standing in the ruins of the house of Atreus, holding a broom, sweeping up ash. Because no one promised to clean this up. They only promised to ignite it. You exit the chamber slowly. And for the first time tonight, you wonder which hurts more, the promises broken, or the ones that were fulfilled and still ruined everything. The hallway narrows again, not in width, but in tone. The silence here is brittle. Every step sounds louder than it should, as if you're walking not on stone but on eggshells, made of old regrets. You've entered the domain of promises whispered in the dark, too soft to echo, too dangerous to ignore. And the woman who waits for you here, she is a mother, a priestess, a widow, and a liar. Her name is Phaedra. She's not monstrous in form. No wings, no fangs, no Gorgon hair. But in the dim corridors of tragedy, she may be one of the most feared, because her myth is not one of violence, it's one of accusation. And it starts, as too many Greek stories do, with an arranged marriage. Phaedra is married to Theseus, yes, that Theseus, slayer of the Minotaur, abandoner of Ariadne, serial promise breaker with a strong jawline and a very poor record in family dynamics. Together, they have children. But one day, Theseus brings home another child, Hippolytus, his son, but not hers, born of a different woman, raised away from court, wild and devout, especially to Artemis, goddess of chastity and the hunt. And here's where the myth splits open like a wound. Phaedra falls in love with him, or claims she does. Historians still argue whether it was true passion, a divine curse from Aphrodite, or the unraveling of a woman left too long in the shadows of other people's legacies. Some say Phaedra never touched him. Others say she begged. Still others suggest it was all an elaborate trap, because when Hippolytus refuses her recoils and leaves, she makes a decision. She writes a note and dies. And in that note she accuses him of the worst kind of betrayal, of violating her. Theseus finds the letter and believes it. Of course he does. He's a man who listens better to ink than to people. He curses his son, calls down Poseidon to destroy him, and that's exactly what happens. The sea rises, a horse panics, a chariot shatters. Hippolytus dies in a tangle of hooves and foam, and only then, does the truth begin to leak out. Phaedra's promise to protect her reputation, her silence, her story. It killed him, and she's already gone. The promise cannot be retracted, only remembered. You step into the mural chamber. It's sparse. Just 2 frescoes. On the left, Phaedra writing. Her hand shakes. Her face is unreadable, part guilt, part fury, part exhaustion. On the right, a beach. A broken chariot, blood smeared across driftwood. And in the middle, no figures, just space. As if the myth itself doesn't know who to show sympathy for. You walk past a row of statues, each one depicting Phaedra in a different phase of her myth. First poised, then haunted, then accusing, then absent. And finally, oddly, a sculpture of her empty robe crumpled on the floor, like a snake that shed its skin and slithered into the next life. On a pedestal beneath it, one line etched in sharp looping Greek, "What do you do with a promise made to save yourself?" You sit for a moment and think about how many women in Greek myth vanish at the moment their stories become uncomfortable. Phaedra's voice only survives because her lie was believed, and her death was timed too well. And Hippolytus, he's a footnote, a cautionary tale about piety and pride. No one rewrote his ending. No one gave him a throne in Elysium. Just silence. You touch the sculpture's edge. It's cold, heavier than it looks, like something that tried to turn shame into armor. The air shifts again. A single scroll rests near the exit, unopened, but sealed with wax in the shape of a rose. You don't read it. You can't. Because it's written in a language only the desperate know, and promises made in panic. They rarely sound the same when spoken aloud. You leave the room, and for a moment it feels like someone is following. Not maliciously, just watching, like a woman with too many secrets and one too many broken hearts. You're deeper now, not in distance, but in tone. The further you walk, the quieter everything becomes. Even your breathing sounds muted, like the air itself is thick with unfinished thoughts. This section of the temple doesn't whisper or echo, it waits. It waits for you to understand that not every monster is made of teeth or talons. Some are made of disappointment. The corridor curves again, and the walls grow strange. They're not carved with images, but with fragments of letters, half sentences. Promises started, then abandoned, scrawled in different hands, different eras, different types of hope. I will return before the olives fall. You'll never be alone, if as long as the stars shine. I'll none of them end. None of them need to. You already know how they finished. They didn't. At the heart of the chamber, a door stands ajar. Not grand, just weathered. Wood warped by too many seasons of waiting. You push it open, and there she is, Scylla. You remember her as a monster, towering, shrieking, tentacled, the horror of the straits, destroyer of ships, devourer of sailors. But not here. Here, she's just a girl, seated on the edge of a stone basin, feet bare, dangling into still water, hair dark, eyes darker, not evil, just unfinished. Because Scylla wasn't always a beast. She was once a nymph, beautiful, admired, loved by some, feared by others, and envied by Circe. Yes, that's Circe, the enchantress, the exile, the misunderstood goddess of herbs and hexes. In some versions of the myth, Scylla is transformed by Circe out of jealousy because Glaucus, a sea god with terrible taste and emotional maturity, falls in love with her and asks Circe for a love potion. Bad idea. Circe gives him a different potion, one meant for Scylla. And when the poor girl steps into the sea, her home, her element, her legs turn into barking dogs, her waist sprouts heads, her arms become horrors, her scream becomes a weapon. She is no longer a girl. She is monstrous. Historians still argue whether Circe's spell was motivated by spite, by love, or by something deeper, a twisted sense of justice perhaps, or the kind of impulse born from too many years of being treated as the other woman. Fringe scholars debate whether Scylla's transformation was physical at all or metaphorical, a punishment for female independence, a metaphor for how young women are torn apart by unwanted attention. But the result, always the same. She becomes unapproachable, unloved, feared, and eternally blamed. You walk slowly toward the basin. On its surface, the water reflects something different for everyone. Right now, it shows a ship, Odysseus' ship, and Scylla tearing through it, limbs flailing, sailors screaming. But look closer, and you notice her face. Not rage, not glee, just confusion and pain, like someone who's woken up from a dream with their body unrecognizable, and their name whispered like a warning. There's a scroll beside the water, thin, frayed. You pick it up, and it crumbles slightly at the edge, but you can still read the title, The Curse of Becoming What They Already Feared. You let it fall and sit beside her. She doesn't speak, just watches the water, and in that silence you hear a question echo through the room. What promise was broken here? Circe's promise to use her magic wisely, Glaucus's promise to love without destroying, or the gods' promise that beauty meant protection. There's no answer, just the sound of waves against unseen walls. You glance to the side and notice etched faintly in the stone a series of transformations, names listed like tally marks of mythic metamorphosis: Arachne, spider; Daphne, tree; Medusa, gorgon; Scylla, beast. All women, all punished, all reshaped until they were less desirable or less powerful or simply less heard. You feel a chill now, not from fear, but from the realization that transformation in these stories rarely feels like evolution, more like erasure. Scylla finally lifts her head and meets your gaze. It's not anger in her eyes. It's the kind of sadness that doesn't cry, it calcifies. She doesn't ask for sympathy, just for memory. You leave the chamber quietly, and as you do, the door behind you closes on its own, softly, almost respectfully, because even monsters deserve their dignity, especially when they never chose it. The corridor grows narrower now, not physically, but emotionally. Each step you take feels like it's walking into a deeper part of someone's unspoken grief, a grief that's been folded into ritual, layered into myth, and then forgotten under centuries of louder names. The air here is thick, not with incense or fire, but with waiting. You pass under an arch made of broken vows. Yes, literally, cracked stone slabs, etched with the beginnings of oaths. Each one stopped mid-sentence, each one ending in silence. And then finally, you enter her space. A small courtyard, half wild. A garden, not one of flowers, but of herbs and salt and stone bowls, crusted with the remnants of old mixtures, leaves dry and curling on the edges, feathers, bone dust, honey hardened into amber. This is the place of Circe. Yes, her again. Because she's never really gone, is she? Every time you think she's just a footnote in someone else's tale, Odysseus's, Glaucus's, Scylla's, she reappears, standing alone, always half seen, always blamed, always powerful enough to survive being misunderstood. You see her now, not as a villain, but as a woman who has kept more promises than anyone ever gave her credit for. Let's be clear, Circe was never monstrous, but she was treated like one. A daughter of Helios and a nymph, she grew up surrounded by gods who spoke in absolutes and loved in approximations. She learned early that power makes people nervous, and female power makes them furious. So when she was exiled to the island of Aeaea, they thought they were punishing her. She turned it into a sanctuary, kind of, because while poets will tell you she turned men into pigs for fun, what they don't say is that they came to her expecting to dominate, to conquer, to extract, to take without cost. And Circe, she simply gave them a face that matched their intentions. Historians still argue whether her transformations were literal or symbolic. Was it magic or was it metaphor? Did the men truly become animals, or did they just finally reveal what they'd always been? Fringe scholars propose that Circe's island was never about punishment, but protection. Not for her, but for us. A place where women could exist without performance, without fear, without needing to say yes when they meant no. But of course the world couldn't let that stand. So her story was rewritten, and even Odysseus, clever, charming, very married Odysseus, comes to her island. And what does she do? She invites him in, feeds him, sleeps with him. But not because she's conquered, because she chooses to. And that is the most terrifying magic of all. Choice, autonomy, refusal to be tragic. You approach a basin in the center of the garden. Floating in it a single apple, perfectly red, untouched, and a knife beside it, not stained, not sharp, just there. Symbolic of temptation, maybe, of decision. Carved into the stone lip of the basin, a phrase curls around like ivy. They made me a monster because they didn't understand what I healed. You glance around, there are jars stacked on crooked shelves, each labeled with the name of someone who came here. Some jars are cracked, some are sealed, some are empty, but still take up space. You reach for one, labeled simply Odysseus, inside a feather and a thread. Nothing more. Because she gave him his shape back and let him go. You turn, and on the wall behind you, a mural appears as your eyes adjust to the shadows. It shows Circe, older than in most myths, not ancient, just tired. She sits by a hearth, no spells, no wands, just a cup of tea, a book, and behind her the ghosts of all the women who came before Medusa, Arachne, Scylla, Cassandra, all standing in silence, watching her stir something slowly in a clay bowl. She doesn't look at them. She doesn't have to, because she knows they're there, and they know she remembers. This is the moment most myths don't write down. The aftermath, the stillness, the rebuilding. Circe never asked to be anyone's villain, but she became the mirror in which men saw their ugliest selves and punished her for it. You walk toward the exit of the garden. At the threshold, there's a vine wrapped around the doorway. It hasn't been cut back. It's grown wild, free, reckless, and utterly alive. You duck beneath it, and for a moment feel it brush your shoulder like a benediction. Because sometimes the softest touch carries the oldest power. The next hallway is narrow, claustrophobically so, and dim. The light here doesn't flicker or flare. It barely glows. It feels like you're walking inside a secret someone tried to forget, but it never stopped breathing. The air carries a faint trace of salt and ink, like seawater and spilled letters. You've arrived at a tale not often told, a story that hides behind louder myths, buried under layers of better branding. This is the story of Arachne, not the first spider, not the last, just the one they couldn't silence. Once she was a weaver, not a goddess, not a witch, just talented. So talented, in fact, that people whispered she must have learned from Athena herself, and that in ancient Greece was a dangerous compliment, because if there's one thing the gods loved more than worship, it was credit. And when Arachne was asked again and again if her skills were a gift from the goddess, she said the worst thing a woman in myth could say, no, It's mine. Athena, of course, heard, and came down from Olympus, not with lightning or wrath, but with a challenge. A weaving contest, thread against thread, mortality against divinity. And here's where things spiral. Arachne didn't flinch. She wove. And what did she choose as her subject? Not flowers, not sunsets, not mythic glories. She wove the sins of the gods, Zeus's trickery, Poseidon's assaults, Apollo's vanities, all laid bare in thread so fine it shimmered like spilled wine. Athena wove Olympus. Arachne wove the truth. Historians still argue whether Arachne meant to offend or just couldn't stomach flattery. Some fringe scholars suggest her tapestry was a political act, a form of protest art, long before paint ever touched a protest sign. But the result, unavoidable. Athena tore it down. She shredded the tapestry. And depending on which version you read, she either cursed Arachne into a spider or Arachne hanged herself from the shame. Both are horrifying. But one is worse. The transformation wasn't punishment for bad art, it was punishment for accuracy. You enter her chamber now. There are no murals, no scrolls, just thread. Thread everywhere. It stretches from wall to wall, some fine as hair, others thick and knotted. It doesn't trap you. It shows you. Each strand is a story someone tried to hide. You brush past one, feel a whisper. He said, I imagined it. Another. She was just being dramatic. Another. No one believed me. They vibrate softly, like the strings of an instrument no one's played in centuries. In the center, a loom, still, untouched, but glowing faintly, like it remembers hands that never shook. You sit beside it, and above the loom carved into the stone in curling delicate letters, I told the truth. And they called it insolence. You look up, and high in the rafters, yes, rafters impossibly far in this temple that somehow keeps growing upward, you see a figure, small, 8-limbed, spinning, watching, not predatory, just present. Because Arachne never died. She simply keeps weaving, telling the stories others rip apart. You stand slowly, careful not to disturb the threads. They don't stick, they don't sting, they just hum, like memory, like tension, like an old song too quiet for the gods to drown out. You walk on, and behind you, one last strand quivers, then stills, but the pattern, it's there, and it's real. Because truth once woven doesn't come undone. Not really. You're not sure when the walls stopped being stone. Now they seem to be woven themselves threads of myth and mist and moth-chewed parchment, forming a corridor that pulses gently with each step you take. It feels like walking through someone's unraveling memory. The path leads downward, not physically, but emotionally, down into regret, down into isolation, and waiting at the end where the air is thick with the scent of dried laurel and wet earth is Daphne. You probably remember the name, but maybe not the full ache behind it, because hers is a story often told from the outside, from the perspective of the god who chased her, not the woman who ran. Let's change that. Daphne was a nymph, a daughter of a river god, wild-hearted, sharp-tongued, and very clear about one thing: she had no interest in love, or marriage, or pursuit. She wanted freedom, hills, trees, silence. But then came Apollo, golden, radiant, entitled. He saw her, wanted her, and that was enough. Because in many myths, a god's desire is the plot. He chased her, through forests, over stones, across rivers that no longer remember her name. And Daphne, she ran, not coyly, not playfully. She ran the way a person runs when they know what will happen if they stop. Historians still argue whether Apollo's pursuit was meant to be romantic or cautionary, but ask any woman who's ever looked over her shoulder, and they'll tell you it never felt like love. In her final moment, breath-ragged steps faltering, she made a request not to Apollo, but to her father, the river god. "Change me," she begged. "Let me escape." And he did. Her legs rooted, her arms branched, her hair turned to leaves. And Daphne became a laurel tree. Apollo reached her just in time to hold bark, not skin, to kiss wood, not lips, to crown himself with the leaves of a woman who wanted nothing to do with him. That's the part the myths rarely linger on. Not the chase, not the escape, but the rebranding. Apollo, humiliated, didn't apologize. He declared the laurel sacred. He wore her leaves like a prize. Poets crowned themselves with them. Victory claimed her shape. And Daphne, once a woman, now a tree, was given no say. You enter her space now, not a room, a grove. The floor is soft moss. The air smells of green things and old silence. The ceiling disappears into a canopy woven with gold-streaked leaves that shimmer as if the sun itself still wants her approval. At the center, a tree, slender, winding, strong, and impossibly still. You approach slowly and realize it's not a real tree. It's a sculpture. Bronze, maybe, or stone, but carved so delicately that you can see veins in the leaves, the impression of breath stilled mid-gasp in the bark. Beneath it, a plaque reads, "I fled, and still they turned me into a symbol." You sit at the base and wonder how many women have had to become unrecognizable to survive being seen. How many had to transform to escape someone else's idea of love. There's no bitterness in this space, just a quiet refusal. Daphne didn't leave a warning. She left a legacy, one that keeps getting worn on foreheads of poets who never bothered to ask why she ran. You close your eyes, and for a moment you hear footsteps, distant, fading, not chasing, just retreating, maybe finally letting her go. You don't even notice the door this time. It's like the walls of the grove dissolve behind you, and you're simply somewhere else. No transition, no threshold, just a shift in temperature, in mood, in memory. You're in a theater now, or what used to be one. The marble seats are cracked and faded. The stage is empty, but something lingers in the air. Perfume and prophecy, maybe. You can almost hear the last note of a song that never quite finished. And at the center of it all, in a spotlight that isn't there, but still finds her anyway, is Cassandra. Now brace yourself, because if there's one name that should rattle the columns of Olympus and echo across history with more rage than regret, it's hers. But she's mostly remembered for one thing: not being believed. Let's rewind. Cassandra was a Trojan princess, not a minor side character, not a random handmaiden who wandered in from stage left. Royal blood, sharp mind, voice like clarity, and depending on the version, she either asked Apollo for the gift of prophecy, or he offered it freely in exchange for a kiss. Either way, she got the power. She saw everything: wars, betrayals, fires, not yet lit ruins, not yet raised. And then she refused Apollo. She didn't give him what he wanted. So he cursed her, not by taking away her sight, but by warping her voice. She would still see the future, still speak the truth, but no one would ever believe her. Historians still argue whether this was a cautionary tale about hubris, about resisting gods, or about the perils of female autonomy. Fringe scholars suggest Cassandra represents the erasure of feminine wisdom in patriarchal societies. How women are often expected to speak, but not be heard. You walk closer. The stage is dusted with broken amphorae, each one labeled with a moment she warned against. The wooden horse is a trap. He will betray you. This alliance will burn you. Each one shattered, like the trust no one gave her. Cassandra stands still, no theatrics, no flames in her eyes, just exhaustion, the kind that sinks into your bones and whispers, "I told you so," not with spite, but with sadness. Behind her, on the back wall of the stage, are carved the words, "They made me mad, so they wouldn't have to listen." You sit in the front row and watch as images flicker across the space visions, ghostly and pale Helen stepping off the ship, Paris drawing back his bow, Troy's gates swinging open, the fire licking the edge of the sky, and Cassandra screaming again and again into rooms that only heard what they wanted to hear. No one stopped the war. No one stopped the fall. She survived, but only just. And even then, it didn't end. Because when Troy burned, she was dragged away by Agamemnon as a war prize. The seer who had seen too much, who screamed until her throat bled. And even then, they didn't listen. You turn your head, and on the theater wall, there's a mural. It shows Cassandra with her mouth open mid-speech, but there are wax seals covering the ears of the men around her. Not hands. Seals, as if truth itself had been officially silenced. She's not mad. She's not broken. She's just ignored. And that sometimes is worse. You walk past the stage and behind the curtains. There's no backstage, just a small bench and a single scroll pinned open to a page that reads, "A prophecy doesn't stop being true just because you refuse to hear it." You sit, and the quiet here is heavier than anywhere else. Not peaceful, not eerie, just tired, like it's carried the weight of too many truths. You close your eyes, and for a moment you hear her voice, not screaming, not begging, just talking, clearly, softly. And this time, you listen. The next corridor you enter is flooded, not with water, but with reflections. Polished stone lines the walls and floors, slick as obsidian, and everywhere you look, you see glimpses of yourself. Not fully, not clearly, warped at the edges, a little too tall, a little too hollow, a little too much like someone else's version of you. This is the domain of echo. Yes, that echo. You probably remember the story, fragments of it at least. A nymph cursed to repeat the last words spoken to her. Tragic, poetic, fodder for endless metaphors. But that version, it skips the beginning. The real echo wasn't just a background singer in someone else's heartbreak. She was a talker, a storyteller, a nymph with a voice so charming it could delay the gods themselves. And that's exactly what she did. When Zeus, in one of his many misguided strolls through mortal lands, needed a distraction to cover up yet another affair, Echo helped. She kept Hera talking, distracted her, stretched out conversations with wit and charm and endless, spiraling monologue. Hera noticed, eventually, and when she did, she didn't strike Echo down with lightning or banish her to Tartarus. No, her punishment was more elegant than that. She stole Echo's agency. She cursed her to only speak the final words of others, to become a mirror, not a voice. Historians still argue whether this myth was a warning about gossip, loyalty, or the limits placed on women's speech. Some fringe scholars see Hera's curse as a metaphor for how women are trained to echo others rather than speak from themselves, especially in public, in politics, in love. But here's where it gets worse. Because Echo didn't vanish after the curse, she wandered, still listening, still absorbing, and then she saw Narcissus. Beautiful, vain, shining, like someone dipped in his own reflection. And she fell, but she couldn't say it, not directly. She could only repeat what he said. "Who's there? There, come to me, to me." And when he looked into the pool, into himself, he didn't see her. He saw what he always wanted, only himself. And Echo, who had once been full of voice and laughter and cleverness, faded. Not into nothing, into repetition, into places where only the end of a thought remains. You're in one of those places now. The room around you is curved smooth and domed. You whisper something, and it comes back delayed, a half second behind, but wrong. Not what you meant, just the tail end of it. A joke without a setup, a confession without context, a cry without cause. Echo isn't gone. She's just fragmented. You walk further in, and on the far wall, there's a panel made of old wood, carved deep with these words. They left me with only their endings. Beneath it, a single rose grows from a crack in the floor. No stem, no thorns, just a bloom, delicate open, waiting. And if you lean close, you can hear her voice again. Soft, broken, not defeated, just exhausted. She loved him, it says. Then silence. Then again, loved him. But that's the trick, isn't it? You don't know if she's talking about herself, or you, or someone else entirely. Because Echo never got to finish a sentence again. You turn to leave, and you realize the hallway back has no walls now, only mirrors. And they don't reflect you. They reflect what others said about you. You see, too much, too quiet, too dramatic, too late. They ripple as you walk past like water, like memory. And then, just before you exit, one final phrase appears, your voice this time. I am not just your echo. It doesn't bounce back. It just stays. Still. Complete. Heard. The air thickens before the room arrives. Not with smoke or fog, but with that low prickling sensation of a story people whisper only behind closed doors. The kind with too many versions. The kind no one tells the same way twice. You step through a curtain, not a doorway this time, but layers of fabric, heavy and red, like a stage, waiting for its final act. And at the center of the room, lit by soft torchlight, stands Medusa. Yes, her. You think you know this one. Snakes for hair, turns men to stone, slain by a hero. And yet, none of that is the beginning. It starts in a temple. Poseidon, drunk on pride and sea-slick arrogance, sees Medusa, not yet monstrous, just mortal, beautiful, a priestess of Athena, devoted, unarmed. He wants her. And because this is mythology, he takes her. Not outside, not in a cave, not even in secret. Right there on sacred ground. Medusa doesn't scream. Myths rarely write her voice. What they do right is what came next. Athena, goddess of wisdom, war, and womanhood, punishes Medusa. Not Poseidon, not the sea god who desecrated her temple. The girl. Historians still argue why. Was it wrath detachment, divine protocol? Fringe theorists say Athena was never meant to be a protector of women, just a patron of power. And power in Olympus means not showing weakness. So Athena curses Medusa. Her beauty becomes horror. Her hair becomes serpents. Her gaze becomes fatal. She is transformed, not for sin, but for survival. You stand before her now, and she does not move. She's frozen, mid-breath, caught between scream and silence. But not from fear, from memory. Around the chamber, statues line the walls. Not victims, not villains. Just figures, men mostly caught in shock. Somewhere fear, somewhere guilt. One or two wear relief, each frozen in that last flicker of thought before consequence met them eye to eye. Medusa watches you. Her eyes glow faintly, not deadly, not anymore, just ancient. There's no malice in her face, no madness, no villainy. Only a woman who learned that silence was never protection. That obedience didn't save her. That sometimes the only power left is to be feared. You walk slowly, careful not to disturb the silence. And on the far wall, etched deep into the marble, in looping careful script, you read, "They made me a monster because they couldn't bear to call me a victim." There's a mirror here, cracked, shimmering. It doesn't show you yourself. It shows what others might say if you did fight back. She changed. She snapped. She's dangerous. You touch it. It doesn't break. It reflects back the truth. She survived. You look at Medusa one more time, and in the stillness of the chamber, you see her for what she really was. A warning, a myth twisted, a woman rewritten by the victors, but not erased, not entirely, because monsters once made tend to linger, especially when they're born from silence. By now, your footsteps no longer echo. The floor beneath you is soft moss, maybe, or memory, and the air is thick with something unspoken, the weight of promises never kept, vows made by gods and discarded like yesterday's offerings. But here, finally, is where the pattern shifts, because in this quiet clearing beyond the marble halls and broken altars, something else remembers. Not the gods, not the poets, but the monsters. You step into a space with no ceiling open, to stars that never blink. The constellations above are familiar, but somehow rearranged. They shimmer with shapes you don't recognize, women with claws, men with wings, things with scales that shouldn't shimmer so beautifully. This place isn't a temple. It's a refuge, a sanctuary of oaths that were never broken by the ones who were supposed to break everything. You begin with Scylla. You were told she was a sea beast. Tentacles, teeth, terror. But before that, she was a nymph, kind, shy, devoted to Artemis. And then, depending on the version, she was cursed by Circe, maybe, or by a jealous suitor, or by the gods just having a bad day. One moment she's human, the next, 12 legs, 6 heads, bark instead of skin. But she doesn't lash out randomly. She guards her stretch of sea, predictably, with ritual. Ships pass too close. She strikes, but never first. Then there's Arachne, another tail twisted, a mortal woman so talented at weaving that she embarrassed Athena in a contest. She didn't cheat. She didn't boast. She just told the truth with her thread. Stories of the gods' lies, their scandals, their betrayals, and Athena She couldn't handle that kind of honesty. So she turned her into a spider, not to kill her, but to silence her. Only Arachne kept weaving. Even now, if you listen closely in a dusty attic, you might hear her stories stretching across beams, embroidered in the corners no one bothers to dust. Fringe scholars say monsters in Greek myths often represent those who kept inconvenient truths, who didn't flinch, who didn't fold. And then there's the Sphinx, half woman, half lion, all riddle. She was said to be cruel to devour those who failed her questions. But no one talks about the answers, or that she gave people a chance, something gods rarely did. You stand before a sculpture now. It's all of them. Scylla, Arachne, Sphinx, Medusa, twisting upward like a column made of limbs and eyes and wings. And at the top, instead of horror, there's calm. Their eyes are closed, not in shame, but in rest. These creatures, these monsters, didn't forget their promises. They kept them to protect, to remember, to guard sacred truths the gods refused to speak aloud, and they were punished for it. You trace a line in the moss beneath your feet. It glows faintly, a circle of salt, broken only where you stand. And on the ground etched just beside it is this: we became the things they warned you about because they were afraid we'd tell you the truth. You sit for a moment, not out of fear, out of respect, because these aren't villains. They're footnotes with claws, margins with teeth, oaths kept in shadows because the spotlight refused to honor them. Above you, the stars shift again. And for the first time tonight, you feel something unexpected. Not dread, not sorrow, not sleepiness even, but loyalty to something older than Olympus, something too honest to be divine. And now the hallway narrows. Not physically, there's still space to walk, but the feeling draws in closer, like a cloak, wrapped tighter around your shoulders as the night deepens. The myths are quieter here. They whisper rather than declare. They hum rather than shout. You are walking into the forgotten now, past temples that no longer stand, past stories that never got their marble busts. And there, sitting on a smooth stone in a field of wild thyme, is the final woman they turned into something else, Lamia. You've heard her name, maybe in hushed warnings or odd little nursery rhymes, tales of a child-devouring creature, a bogey woman sent to frighten bad children. But Lamia wasn't born a monster. She was a queen, a Libyan queen, known for her beauty, her wisdom, and yes, depending on the telling, her romance with Zeus. Of course, because where else would this be heading? Their affair bore children. And Hera, in her usual fury, struck again, not at her husband, not at the betrayal, but at Lamia. Depending on the myth, Hera either stole her children or had them killed in front of her. Some say Lamia went mad from grief. Others say Hera cursed her, not just with loss, but with sleeplessness, a twisted divine joke that she would never again close her eyes. And so Lamia became something else. Fangs, claws, hunger. She roamed the night, devouring children, not from cruelty, but as a reflection of her own pain, as if reliving her loss in reverse, as if somewhere inside she thought if she consumed enough grief, hers might fade. Historians still argue whether Lamia was a demon, a symbol, or a political myth to justify invading Libyan territory. Fringe interpretations claim her legend was repurposed by Greek patriarchy to paint powerful foreign women as dangerous and inhuman. But none of that matters here, because Lamia is no longer a legend. She's just tired. You sit beside her. The stone is warm from something deeper than sun. She doesn't speak. She just offers you a cup, a small chipped one filled with something bitter. You sip, and the taste is sharp, real, like memory mixed with salt. She nods and points to a tree nearby. It's covered in names, scratched in with fingers, not chisels, names of women turned beast because they refused to be erased. Scylla, Arachne, Medusa, Pandora, Circe, Echo, Lamia, and beneath them in smaller text, not monsters, just miswritten. You breathe in, and the wind changes. The myths don't feel like warnings anymore. They feel like diaries, like stories left open on the last page, waiting for someone, maybe you, to remember them fully. The stars above begin to dim, not vanish, just soften. You close your eyes, and for the first time tonight, there is nothing chasing you. No screaming gods, no snapping jaws, only the gentle lull of stories that weren't broken, just bent, and now they're heard. So here you are, still breathing, still soft around the edges, from the long walk through forgotten stories where monsters weren't born, they were made. You can feel the weight of the myths begin to lift like dust shaken loose from old velvet. It doesn't vanish. It just floats, slowly, gently. Settle deeper into your pillow. Let your hands rest. Let your breath slow. You've met the women they tried to silence, reshape, rewrite. The ones they pushed into caves and towers and shadows so they'd stop being inconvenient. But they didn't disappear. They just waited. And now they've whispered themselves back into memory. You're not holding them. You're not responsible for fixing their stories. Just carry the echo of them in your stillness. In this quiet, where the gods have fallen silent and the statues no longer watch, where no one demands your voice or questions your rage or tells you to smile just to keep the sky from shaking. You've walked through temples and teeth and time, and you made it here, to the softest part of the story. Let it settle now. Let the world go dim. There's no hero left to chase, no curse left to dodge, only you, safe, still, and gently remembered. Good night.